and then somebody else occupies it, they have to occupy it at the same rate as you occupied it. So in Saudi it's called a rent freeze, whereas in California it's called rent control. But in Sacramento, you're allowed to increase the rent once a year, so it's annual, and it's based on a percentage basis, and it's typically 5% plus CPI.
His career started at the same time as rent control did in California. Today we're here with Ahmed Alsuhail, who is originally from Iraq but has been based in California for the last 17 years. And he's now here in Saudi Arabia. Thank you for being with us today, Ahmed.
Good to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Likewise.
And funnily enough, we got in touch through him watching my interview with someone else in this same place. And now here you are. You were asking about moving to Saudi Arabia, and now you are here in Saudi Arabia.
Right.
Alhamdulillah, salama.
Yeah, Allah ysalmek.
I hope you're enjoying your time here so far. Today we're talking about rent control, but maybe we can make some more videos about your experience moving to Saudi Arabia and everything. So how are you finding it so far here?
I love it. Saudi's amazing. Just like he said, it's funny, this comes full circle. You know, somebody else was sitting right here, and when I was watching an expat video about how to come to Saudi Arabia, and I would encourage anybody who's looking, you know, at these videos, you know, reach out, because that's the best way to come here. You know, it's great to connect with people over LinkedIn, and that's exactly how me and you connected, right? You know, I reached out to you over LinkedIn, and I've reached out to you know, multiple people, and I just asked them questions about, you know, the culture, the work environment, the companies, you know, salaries, just whatever it is. And you covered a lot of those topics in the video, but it's also good to talk to other people and that actually live in that place, because sometimes it's not enough to see articles and you know, they always do these studies on the markets. It's better to talk to the people firsthand. So yeah, I would encourage anybody who's moving to Saudi Arabia to reach out. So
and of course, for your specific case, for your exact case, you know, to get like a detailed, like bespoke kind of response. It's different from just watching a generic video.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
You were in commercial real estate in California,
right?
And now you're doing commercial real estate here as well.
Yes.
In Saudi Arabia. Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about commercial real estate? Like, what does that mean? Is it like warehouses, malls, supermarkets, land? Like, what is it?
So what classifies a commercial real estate, my background is from California. For 5 years I was working with Colliers International, a commercial real estate firm. Commercial real estate in California, you have office buildings, retail, you have industrial, which is you know, warehousing, manufacturing buildings, and logistics. And then you also have multifamily, which is residential, but it classifies as commercial because anything above 5 units is considered a commercial building. Okay. And over there, multifamily, it's considered a whole compound. So you're classifying it as a whole compound, not as individual units. Whereas in Saudi, I think it's considered just only residential. So even if it's an apartment building that has 150 units, it's considered just residential. So that's a little bit different. And in Saudi, same thing. You know,
is it considered residential even if you're dealing with the buyer of the entire building?
I believe so. I think it falls within the bracket of just residential. Okay. And it's considered commercial in the United States because of the financing. In order to go get financing to buy an apartment building that has 100 units or 10 units, you need to get commercial financing, which is different than residential financing. So if you were to buy a house, a duplex, triplex, fourplex, you have to get a residential loan. And then if you're buying an apartment building that has 5 units and more, then you would have to get a commercial loan. So that's what makes it a little bit different.
Our main topic is the rental freezing, was it?
Rent control.
Rent control, okay.
Yeah. It was called, in California it's called rent control, over here it's called rent freeze.
Okay.
So I guess that's
maybe
what
that's
makes it a
why
little
it's
bit
in my
different.
head.
Right.
Okay, so what does that exactly mean? So that means that, like, if I'm a landlord and I'm charging X amount of rent, I can't just double it tomorrow?
So the rent freeze over here in Saudi Arabia is you're not allowed to increase the rent for the next 5 years. So let's say you live in an apartment building and your unit is 80,000 riyals a year, it's going to be the same for the next 5 years. So until, even if there's a new tenant that comes in, so let's say you exit the building and then somebody else occupies it, they have to occupy it at the same rate as you occupied it. So it stays 80,000 for the next 5 years.
Okay. And how is that compared to rent control in America or California?
So rent control, and this is where it's different because over here in Saudi it's called a rent freeze, whereas in California it's called rent control. And in rent control in California, and this is, each state is different, and sometimes each city within the state is different. So rent control in San Francisco is different than rent control in Sacramento because it's such an expensive city in San Francisco that the rent increase is actually very minimal. I think you can only increase it maybe 1%. Sometimes it's even less than 1%. But in Sacramento, you're allowed to increase the rent once a year, so it's annual, and it's based on a percentage basis, and it's typically 5% plus CPI. CPI is a consumer price index, which is pretty much inflation.
Yeah.
So let's say inflation, let's say for that year is 3%, then you're allowed to increase 8%. But you're also capped at 10. So let's say inflation for that year, which was actually a case because inflation was very high. I believe in 2022, inflation was like 6% or 7%.
And how's that contributed to like people leaving California? And like, how does California's rent control and before they introduced it, like how's it compared to other states?
It's a very complex question. And what typically happens with these very expensive areas is that people just end up moving to another place. So let's say, for example, 2020, a lot of people came from San Francisco because San Francisco is such an expensive city and it's only an hour and a half away from Sacramento. So
this commute from
exactly.
there.
So what ended up
it's a
happening,
long commute, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's about an hour and a half. So let's say somebody was in San Francisco and they were paying $2,000 for a studio. Now they can come to Sacramento and they're paying, let's say, $1,100 for a studio, but to that person in Sacramento, $1,100 for a studio is a lot. But from a San Francisco perspective, it's not, which is why rents also increased in Sacramento. Because now you have all these people that migrated from the Bay Area and now they're paying a premium, which also increased the rent. So it's all perspective at the end of the day, right? Because if you're, like we said, if you're in San Francisco and you're paying $2,000 for a studio, if you come to Sacramento now, it's $1,100. To you, that's a steal, right? That's an amazing price. But to a person in Sacramento, to them, they were paying like $900 for a studio. But now because you have, a lot more demand, so increases the prices.
And also they probably are seeing there's tenants willing to pay more.
Exactly.
So just increase it and then I'll price out all the Sacramento people. Basically.
Exactly, and that's exactly what happened. So what ends up happening to the people from San Francisco, Sacramento, they end up going to another city like Yuba City or the suburbs where it's a little bit more cheap.
How do you think this affects the economy and like investor sentiment in real estate, like before versus after the rent control? Like obviously before rent control, it's more power in the landlord's hand, right? Like it's better for them because they just have more control. They can charge whatever they want. But then once this rent control came, then how did that affect the investor sentiment and therefore the economy? Because I think the economy relies a lot on investor sentiment.
Right.
Do you agree?
I agree, yes. And I think this is overall good for the market because it's good for the tenants. Because without the tenants, what would the landlord do? So I think, to your point, we talked about it earlier, I think it just brings a lot more stability to the market, less turnover because people are now going to be staying in that unit for a longer period of time, which is also a good thing. I think there's always a gap in the market when something like that shifts. So right when rent control took effect in California, people held off. Buyer demand went down because people didn't know what they were going to do. But people eventually, I think mentally just adapt to the market and it just becomes a standard. And I think they just work around it, whether, they do service charges somehow. Maybe they have in-house keeping in the apartment building. That way they can offset and increase and get a little bit more income that way. Property management services. So I think they'll work around it somehow.
And we also need to remember that there is a distinct difference between rent control and rent freeze.
Right.
So rent freeze is like a whole other game. Like
right.
It's like fixed rent for 5 years.
For 5 years, yes, yeah.
How do you think that affects investor sentiment? That must be a bit tricky, right?
That's a question that I don't know yet. Yeah, this is still new. Obviously, this just took effect.
Yeah.
I think there's still going to be a lot of demand still because this is Saudi. There's such a big buzz around Saudi in general.
And businesses are coming here
Exactly. There's so many incentives to be here. And I think just the growth overall and the demand that's going to come here. So I think overall it's going to be good. We don't have a crystal ball. It's going to
Yeah.
tell us the future. But I think it's a very exciting time to be in Saudi. Everybody wants to be here. There's a huge opportunity everywhere. This is the next hub, right? This is essentially the next, I guess, like New York of the Middle East,
Yeah.
right? So I think overall, people will still have a lot of confidence in investing in Saudi.
So you are in commercial.
Yes.
So you deal more with basically landlords or building owners.
Right.
So like you obviously have a different interaction with clients than like a landlord or like someone dealing with someone who's buying a single apartment.
Right.
So like what's the difference? Like and especially for commercial real estate, like in non-residential like office buildings, shop plots,
Right.
warehouses, like how does rent control and this kind of stuff come into play here?
Yes.
And even rent freeze for that matter, like
Right.
is it also there or is it different rules for non-residential?
So are you referring to the residential here or in California?
Both.
So the rent freeze over here, it applies for, I believe, all property, commercial and residential, specifically residential, because it's gotten out of control. I think somebody was telling me like 2-3 years ago, an apartment used to be 20,000-30,000, which is now
Reals?
80,000, right? Is that correct? Maybe 3-4 years ago.
I mean, things have gone up a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a pretty steep increase.
Yeah.
But there has been like a very big increases.
Right.
Yeah. So from your experience in speaking with landlords and property investors, how did they take this news of rent control starting in California, and how did they work around it? Are there any like hacks or loopholes legally that people could use for like our fellow landlords out there?
So I think it depends. Let's say you're a long-term owner and you've owned since the 90s. You didn't care much about the rent increase because your profit margins were very well, because your tax bases were so low because you purchased a property 30 years ago. Whereas for a new investor, this affects you a lot more because you depend on those rent increases, but now you're capped, right? So I would say, and even for the long-term owners, I was advising them to increase the rents slowly each year, because the value of your property is directly correlated to the income of the property. So let's say you have an apartment building that has 10 units and your rents are at $700, whereas the market rents are $1,500. Now when it comes time to sell the property, because let's say now you want to retire, you want to cash out, now your rents are at $700. You're capped at a certain amount, so therefore the investor is going to come and say, hey, let me see your rent roll. And when they see your rent roll is only at $700 a unit, that's going to scare them a little bit, because now they'd rather buy an apartment building where the rents are, of course, $1,500 up to market value, because they're capped. They can't overnight, increase the rent from $700 to $1,500. So that's the advice that I was giving owners at the time, and a lot of them started doing that slowly, so just incremental increases year by year. And there isn't really a hack or a way to get around it. The difference in, of course, California and Saudi is that let's say your unit is $700, and then now the tenant leaves, you're allowed to increase it to market rent. So you're allowed to renovate the unit and then now charge $1,500.
So in California, if the tenant leaves, you can charge whatever you want?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. And it's also...
Even if it's more than the CPI and 5%?
Exactly. Market rent, whatever it is.
You can triple it, you can do whatever you want?
Exactly. Yep.
Wait,
exactly.
What do you mean market rent?
Market rent is let's say in the surrounding areas, a one bedroom is $1,500.
It has to be around that?
It doesn't have to be around that. Let's say you make a really nice unit and you can charge $1,900. You can ask for $2,300, whatever it is. So market rent isn't capped at whatever the market. It's based on the demand and what's around. Yeah.
Okay, Ahmed, thank you very much for that valuable information. We'll leave his information down in the link below. Feel free to reach out to him on LinkedIn. Thank you for coming.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, and keep up the good work. Love the channel.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.